Ma'am, that seat isn't for someone like you. The sentence drifted across the ballroom just loudly enough to silence the conversations nearby, and for a heartbeat the glittering gala seemed to stop breathing. Crystal chandeliers poured warm gold across polished marble floors while a string quartet played softly beneath the soaring ceiling, but every elegant note suddenly felt distant. Maya Brooks rested one hand on the back of the chair with her name card displayed neatly in front of it, her expression calm despite the dozens of curious eyes turning toward her. She had arrived 15 minutes before the program began, dressed in a simple midnight blue evening gown with understated pearl earrings, choosing elegance over extravagance. Nothing about her appearance announced unimaginable wealth, and that was exactly how she preferred it. Across from her stood Ethan Carter, a senior vice president whose tailored tuxedo and confident smile made him look perfectly at home among investors, politicians, and industry leaders. Beside him, his wife Olivia adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist before sliding smoothly into Maya's assigned chair as though the decision required no explanation at all. She crossed one leg over the other, set her silver clutch on the table, and smiled politely enough to disguise the unmistakable message behind her eyes. "I'm sure there are plenty of open seats," Olivia said with effortless confidence. "This section is reserved." Maya glanced once at the embossed place card that clearly displayed her own name before lifting her eyes back to Olivia. "You're sitting in my assigned seat," she replied gently. There was no anger in her voice, only quiet certainty. Ethan let out a small laugh that several nearby guests eagerly echoed. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said. "These tables are for executive leadership and honored guests." Maya nodded once. "That's correct." Ethan's smile widened, convinced he had already won the exchange. "Then I'm sure the event staff can help you find another table." Around them, conversations faded into whispers. A few guests exchanged uncertain glances, while others openly watched with the kind of fascination reserved for moments that promised public embarrassment. A waiter carrying sparkling water slowed almost instinctively before continuing toward another table, sensing the invisible tension settling over the room. Maya noticed every reaction without acknowledging any of them. She had spent most of her career recognizing the difference between curiosity and courage. One attracted crowds. The other required character. She gently folded the invitation card in her hand and spoke with remarkable composure. "I believe there's simply been a mistake." Olivia tilted her head with a sympathetic smile that somehow felt colder than open hostility. "Sometimes invitations are confusing. It happens." A ripple of restrained laughter spread across nearby tables. Maya remained perfectly still. The polished marble reflected the chandelier light beneath her heels while soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers, creating a strange contrast between the beauty of the evening and the discomfort quietly unfolding in front of hundreds of influential guests. Near the entrance, photographers continued capturing smiling executives who knew nothing about the growing silence inside the ballroom. Maya could have ended the misunderstanding with a single sentence. She could have introduced herself. She could have corrected every false assumption in less than 5 seconds. Instead, she simply stepped aside to allow an elderly server pushing a dessert cart enough room to pass safely between the tables. She smiled warmly at him and thanked him by name after reading the embroidered stitching on his uniform. The elderly man returned the smile with genuine gratitude before disappearing into the crowd. Ethan watched the interaction with visible impatience. "Security will probably sort this out soon," he muttered under his breath. Maya looked once more at the chair bearing her name, then quietly lifted her gaze toward the massive LED screen above the stage where the evening's opening presentation would begin in only a few moments. The screen remained dark, the orchestra softened into silence, and somewhere behind the curtains, the master of ceremonies prepared to welcome the one person in the ballroom almost no one had ever seen. The room remained suspended in uneasy silence as Maya Brooks stood a respectful distance from the table that had been prepared for her weeks before the gala began. She neither defended herself nor argued for recognition because this evening had never been about proving who she was. Long before she became the chief executive officer of Carter Global Holdings, she had learned that character always revealed itself when people believed no one important was watching. Years earlier she had grown up in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, where her mother worked double shifts as a hospital receptionist and her father repaired heating systems across the city. They never measured success by the size of a paycheck. They measured it by whether a person could leave a room having made someone else's day a little easier. Those lessons stayed with Maya long after scholarship opportunities carried her to one of the country's top business schools and eventually into boardrooms where she was often the youngest executive and frequently the only black woman seated at the table. She never forgot what it felt like to be underestimated before speaking a single word. When Carter Global's board unanimously selected her to lead the company 8 months earlier, Maya made one unusual request before accepting the position. Her public introduction would be delayed until after an independent evaluation of the company's leadership culture. Press releases announced a new chief executive officer, but photographs were intentionally withheld, interviews postponed, and internal appearances limited to encrypted video conferences with cameras disabled whenever possible. The board believed it was an unconventional strategy. Maya believed it was the fastest way to discover whether respect inside the company was earned through values or reserved only for titles. During those months she quietly visited regional offices, distribution centers, manufacturing facilities, and customer service departments under ordinary circumstances, speaking with receptionists, custodians, drivers, interns, and cashiers who had no idea they were talking to the woman responsible for every major decision affecting the organization. The stories they shared painted a complicated picture. Most employees loved their work, yet many quietly admitted that certain executives judged people by appearances long before considering ability. That pattern concerned Maya more than any financial report ever could. Tonight's annual leadership gala would provide one final observation before she publicly stepped into the role everyone already knew existed but almost nobody could identify by face. She intentionally instructed the event planners not to announce her arrival, not to assign personal security nearby, and not to escort her through the ballroom. She wanted one ordinary walk from the entrance to her assigned table. Nothing more. Nothing less. Across the room Ethan Carter straightened his tuxedo jacket while greeting investors with effortless confidence. His division had produced record profits, and industry magazines regularly described him as the future face of the company. Olivia smiled comfortably beside him, accepting compliments as though they naturally belonged to both of them. Neither noticed the event coordinator standing near the backstage entrance repeatedly checking her watch before glancing anxiously toward the ballroom floor. She knew exactly who Maya Brooks was. She also knew the opening presentation had already been synchronized with the large screen above the stage. There was no opportunity to quietly fix what had just happened. Behind the velvet curtains technicians counted down the final minutes before the program began, while the massive display remained dark except for the faint reflection of crystal chandeliers shimmering across its surface. Maya folded her invitation carefully and slipped it into her evening clutch before looking once more across the crowded ballroom. She did not see enemies. She saw leaders being tested by a moment they did not even realize would define them. The first notes of the orchestra faded completely as the ballroom lights softened, leaving only the warm glow of hundreds of candles reflected across polished glass and silver. Conversations gradually returned, but they carried a different tone now. Guests whispered behind raised champagne glasses, stealing careful glances toward the elegant black woman who had quietly stepped away from the disputed table instead of creating a scene. To many of them she had already become a mystery worth discussing. Ethan Carter noticed the attention and mistook it for approval. He adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo, exchanged another confident smile with a regional director, and accepted congratulations from colleagues who believed his promotion to Chief Operating Officer was almost guaranteed. His division had delivered impressive quarterly results, and tonight he expected the board to acknowledge years of aggressive expansion under his leadership. Olivia leaned closer and whispered with a satisfied smile. "You handled that well. Some people simply do not know where they belong." Ethan nodded without hesitation. Image matters in this business. Clients expect confidence. Neither of them realized several employees standing only a few feet away had heard every word. A young financial analyst lowered her eyes toward the tablecloth, clearly uncomfortable, while an older operations manager quietly looked away. No one challenged Ethan directly. Inside Carter Global, his reputation carried considerable influence. He was known for making difficult decisions quickly, rewarding high performers generously, and expecting absolute loyalty from everyone below him. Many admired his results. Others privately questioned his judgment. Across the ballroom, Maya observed the room with the same calm focus she had maintained since entering the hotel. She recognized familiar faces from quarterly reports, employee town halls, and regional visits conducted under different circumstances. She also noticed the invisible lines that divided the room. Senior executives naturally clustered together beneath the brightest chandeliers while administrative staff remained closer to the side walls, careful not to interrupt conversations among company leadership. Event servers moved gracefully between tables carrying polished trays, almost unnoticed despite doing the hardest work of the evening. Maya greeted each passing employee with the same quiet smile. Some returned the gesture. Others simply hurried past, unaware they had just exchanged eye contact with the person responsible for approving the company's entire annual budget. Near the entrance, the event coordinator received another message through her headset. 30 seconds, the stage manager quietly announced. She inhaled deeply before looking toward Maya with growing concern. She wanted to intervene, to escort the chief executive officer to the stage before another misunderstanding unfolded, but Maya had given explicit instructions weeks earlier. No special treatment. No introductions until the scheduled presentation. The coordinator reluctantly honored those wishes even as anxiety settled across her face. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed one of the security supervisors approaching through the crowd. Assuming the situation would finally be resolved, he gave a subtle nod toward Maya's direction. The supervisor slowed before reaching them, his eyes moving from Ethan to Olivia and finally toward Maya. Something about the expression on his face changed almost instantly. Instead of asking Maya to leave, he touched the communication device near his ear, listened carefully for several seconds, and quietly stepped backward without saying a single word. Ethan frowned. "Is there a problem?" The supervisor offered only a polite response. "Everything is proceeding according to schedule, sir." Before Ethan could ask another question, the massive LED screen stretching across the stage flickered softly for the first time that evening. The ballroom lights dimmed another level until thousands of crystal reflections shimmered across the ceiling like distant stars. Every conversation stopped. Every chair turned toward the stage. Even the orchestra lowered their instruments in perfect silence. Maya remained standing near the back of the executive section, her hands gently folded before her, as the first image slowly appeared against the enormous screen. It was not a company logo. It was an old photograph of a small brick building with boarded windows and a faded sign that read Carter Manufacturing, taken nearly 20 years before the corporation became one of the largest businesses in the country. The photograph slowly dissolved into another image showing the same factory years later, its broken windows replaced with bright offices and modern production lines stretching across thousands of square feet. Soft piano music replaced the orchestra as a calm narrator began telling the story of resilience, innovation, and people who believed a struggling company deserved another chance. Around the ballroom, guests watched the presentation with quiet admiration, but Maya was paying attention to something else entirely. She was watching faces instead of photographs. She noticed which executives smiled proudly during the success stories, which employees became emotional when former factory workers appeared on the screen, and which people barely looked up from their phones. Leadership, she often believed, revealed itself most clearly when no one thought they were being observed. Ethan leaned comfortably against the back of his chair, crossing one arm over the other as though the evening were unfolding exactly as he had expected. Whenever a video highlighted recent sales growth or international expansion, he accepted congratulatory nods from nearby colleagues with the confidence of someone already imagining the next chapter of his career. Olivia quietly admired the room around her, satisfied that she occupied one of the most prestigious seats in the ballroom. Neither of them noticed that several members of the board occasionally glanced toward Maya before quickly looking away again, carefully following the confidential instructions they had all agreed to honor. The presentation continued, tracing the company's history through economic downturns, difficult restructuring, and years when survival itself seemed uncertain. Then the narrator spoke a sentence that caused several longtime employees to straighten in their chairs. Every great organization reaches a moment when one courageous decision changes everything. The screen faded to black before displaying financial headlines from nearly a decade earlier. Losses. Layoffs. Declining market value. Industry experts predicting bankruptcy within months. Quiet murmurs spread across the ballroom. As many younger employees realized for the first time how close Carter Global had once come to disappearing forever. Ethan watched with only mild interest. He had joined after the company's recovery had already begun and often described himself as part of the leadership team that accelerated its success. He had never asked who first made that recovery possible. The next sequence showed anonymous hands reviewing balance sheets, handwritten notes covering conference tables, and late nights inside nearly empty offices. Faces remained intentionally hidden. The narrator continued. While many investors walked away, one leader believed that rebuilding trust inside the company mattered just as much as rebuilding profits. Maya lowered her eyes for only a moment, remembering those endless nights spent studying impossible budgets while searching for a path that would save thousands of jobs. She had never cared whether history remembered her name. She cared that families continued receiving paychecks every Friday. Across the ballroom, the event coordinator discreetly received one final confirmation through her headset. She looked toward the master of ceremonies waiting just beyond the curtain. He nodded once. Everything was ready. Nearby, the security supervisor who had earlier approached Ethan now stood quietly beside the stage entrance, his posture noticeably more formal than before. Several board members exchanged brief glances before placing their programs neatly on the tables in front of them. The atmosphere inside the ballroom shifted almost imperceptibly, as though everyone involved in the evening's planning had silently reached the same destination at exactly the same moment. Ethan sensed the subtle change but interpreted it as anticipation for the keynote speech. He smiled confidently and whispered to Olivia, "This is probably where they announce the executive appointments." Olivia squeezed his hand beneath the table, already imagining the applause that would follow. Neither of them noticed that the camera operators had quietly repositioned every lens toward the aisle where Maya continued standing with remarkable composure. The music gently faded until only complete silence remained, and the enormous screen displayed 5 simple words in bright white letters that caused every member of the board to rise from their seats before anyone else had the chance to react: the leader who changed everything. Every person in the ballroom instinctively turned toward the enormous screen as the words lingered in silence, their reflection shimmering across crystal glasses and polished marble. The anticipation felt almost tangible, hanging in the warm air beneath the chandeliers. Ethan rose halfway from his chair, convinced the tribute would recognize one of the board members before introducing the company's future leadership team. He adjusted his jacket one more time, already preparing the gracious smile he planned to wear when his name was eventually announced. Olivia glanced proudly around the room, believing they were exactly where they deserved to be. Then the screen faded once again. Instead of revealing a face, it displayed a series of handwritten journal pages, financial projections covered with notes, and photographs of exhausted employees working late into the night inside aging conference rooms. The narrator spoke slowly, allowing every sentence to settle over the audience. When others saw numbers, this leader saw families. When others measured risk, this leader measured responsibility. Every difficult decision began with one question. How many people can we protect? The ballroom grew quieter with every passing second. Maya remained exactly where she had been standing, her posture relaxed, her expression composed, as though none of the praise belonged to her at all. She remembered those years differently from the elegant presentation unfolding across the screen. She remembered cold coffee, endless spreadsheets, conversations with worried employees, and promises she refused to make unless she knew she could keep them. Success had never arrived with applause. It had arrived one careful decision at a time. Near the front of the ballroom, several longtime executives exchanged knowing smiles, recognizing memories that no annual report could fully capture. One elderly board member quietly removed his glasses, his eyes lingering on the photographs with unmistakable gratitude. He remembered the meeting when nearly everyone had voted to sell the company in pieces. Only one voice had argued that people deserved another chance. That voice had changed everything. Ethan shifted uneasily in his seat. Something about the presentation no longer matched the ceremony he expected. The company history seemed deeply personal, almost as though it were building toward introducing someone whose influence extended far beyond quarterly profits. He leaned toward Olivia and whispered, "I thought this was going to be the executive recognition segment." Olivia answered with a small shrug, but even she noticed the unusual behavior spreading across the room. Board members had stopped speaking altogether. Department presidents sat perfectly still. Even distinguished guests from outside the company appeared to know that an important moment was approaching. The master of ceremonies stepped quietly toward the center of the stage but did not speak. Instead, he waited patiently while the final images continued across the screen. Employees volunteering after hurricanes. Scholarship recipients celebrating college graduations. Factory workers receiving service awards beside smiling families. Community centers bearing the company's name. None of the photographs identified the person responsible for approving those programs, yet every image pointed toward the same unseen leader. Maya watched them without seeking recognition. Those moments had never belonged to her alone. They belonged to thousands of people who chose compassion over convenience every single day. Across the ballroom, the event coordinator discreetly opened the velvet rope separating the center aisle from the audience. Camera operators slowly rotated their equipment until every lens pointed toward the exact place where Maya stood. The movement was subtle enough that most guests never noticed, but Ethan finally did. A faint line formed across his forehead as uncertainty replaced confidence. He looked from the stage to the aisle, then toward the quiet woman he had dismissed only minutes earlier. She had not moved. She had not argued. She had not demanded respect. She had simply waited with remarkable patience, as though she already knew the evening did not belong to the loudest voice in the room but to the truth that was only seconds away from stepping into the light. Silence settled over the ballroom with a quiet weight that no speech could have created. The final image on the enormous screen slowly dissolved into a field of soft white light, leaving only the words that had already transformed the atmosphere inside the room. No one applauded. No one whispered. Even the servers paused beside their tables, holding polished silver trays without making a sound. Maya Brooks remained exactly where she had been from the beginning of the evening, standing with calm dignity near the aisle, her hands resting gently in front of her. The warm glow of the chandeliers reflected against the marble floor beneath her feet while hundreds of tiny points of light shimmered across the crystal glasses arranged throughout the ballroom. It was a beautiful room, yet for Maya it felt strangely familiar. She had experienced moments like this before, moments when truth approached quietly while assumptions slowly collapsed under their own weight. She took a slow breath, not because she was nervous, but because she understood that what happened during the next few minutes would shape the culture of an entire company for years to come. She thought briefly about her parents, who had taught her that respect was never something to demand from strangers. It was something to practice consistently, especially when no reward seemed likely. Her mother often reminded her that kindness revealed strength far more clearly than anger ever could. Her father believed that a person's real character appeared in the ordinary moments when nobody important seemed to be watching. Tonight, those lessons stood beside her more faithfully than any title ever could. Across the ballroom Ethan Carter no longer looked relaxed. His confident posture had gradually disappeared, replaced by quiet uncertainty he could not explain. Something inside him insisted that he had overlooked an important detail. He watched the board members still standing with respectful expressions, their attention focused not on the stage but somewhere behind him. Olivia noticed it as well. She slowly lowered her champagne glass onto the table without taking another sip. Around them, executives who had been laughing only minutes earlier now sat perfectly still. The room felt less like a celebration and more like a moment of collective reflection. Near the stage, the master of ceremonies remained motionless beside the microphone, patiently waiting for a precise cue that had not yet arrived. No one rushed the schedule. No one attempted to fill the silence with unnecessary words. The pause itself carried meaning. It invited every person present to consider what leadership truly looked like before revealing the face behind the story. Maya quietly watched an elderly employee near the back of the ballroom straighten his company's service pin before placing one hand over his heart. She recognized him immediately from a manufacturing facility she had visited several months earlier. During that visit he had proudly spoken about spending 32 years with the company because, in his words, it had always treated working families with dignity. Maya remembered promising herself that preserving that trust mattered more than increasing any quarterly number. She smiled softly as he unknowingly returned the gesture from across the room. The faint sound of an air conditioning vent blended with the distant clink of crystal somewhere near the entrance, tiny reminders that time continued moving even while the ballroom seemed frozen in place. Then, almost imperceptibly, the spotlight nearest the center aisle came to life. Its warm beam stretched across the polished floor until it stopped only a few feet from where Maya stood. Camera operators quietly adjusted their focus. Members of the board turned together toward the same point. Ethan followed their gaze at last, his heartbeat quickening as realization began forming before a single word had been spoken. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at Maya without seeing a stranger. He saw a question that was about to become an answer. The master of ceremonies stepped forward at last, his voice calm enough to preserve the silence that had settled over the ballroom instead of breaking it. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate more than another successful year. We celebrate the leader whose vision carried this company through its darkest chapter and whose values continue to shape every decision we make. The enormous screen behind him faded from white into a single portrait. It was not an old executive from the company's history. It was Maya Brooks. The photograph showed the same composed smile, the same thoughtful eyes, and the same quiet confidence now standing only a few yards away from the stunned audience. For one breathtaking moment, nobody moved. Ethan felt the color drain from his face as he looked from the screen to the woman he had dismissed only minutes earlier. Olivia slowly rose from the chair she had claimed so confidently, her hands trembling almost imperceptibly as the realization settled over her. The room that had whispered about Maya moments before now erupted into a standing ovation that echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers. Every member of the board was already on their feet. Department presidents followed immediately. Investors, community leaders, and employees throughout the ballroom stood together, their applause growing louder with every passing second. Maya remained still until the master of ceremonies smiled warmly and extended one open hand toward the center aisle. Please welcome the Chief Executive Officer of Carter Global Holdings, Ms. Maya Brooks. Only then did she begin walking forward. She did not rush. Every step reflected the same calm confidence that had carried her through years of impossible decisions. The spotlight followed her across the polished marble floor while cameras quietly captured the moment from every angle. As she passed the executive table, Ethan instinctively stepped backward to clear the aisle. He tried to speak, but no words came. His confident smile had disappeared completely, replaced by the unmistakable expression of someone replaying every decision he had made during the evening. Olivia lowered her eyes, unable to look directly at Maya as she walked by. The chair she had insisted belonged to someone more important now stood empty beside her, untouched beneath the warm light. Maya paused beside it for only a brief moment. She gently lifted the place card displaying her name, smiled politely, and continued toward the stage without the slightest hint of resentment. She never reached for the chair. She never reminded anyone that it had always belonged to her. The gesture spoke more powerfully than any speech could have. Quietly watching from nearby, several younger employees exchanged emotional glances. They had expected anger. Instead they witnessed dignity. They had expected humiliation to be answered with revenge. Instead they watched grace move forward one measured step at a time. Maya climbed the short staircase leading to the stage as the applause continued filling every corner of the ballroom. The board chair greeted her with visible admiration before handing her the microphone. He leaned closer and said softly enough that only those nearest could hear, "Thank you for trusting us with your vision." Maya nodded with quiet appreciation before turning toward the audience. Her eyes moved across the room until they briefly met Ethan's. There was no triumph in her expression. No satisfaction at seeing someone embarrassed. Only calm honesty. Ethan understood that look immediately. The woman he had judged by appearance had spent the entire evening evaluating something far more important than financial performance. She had been measuring character. And in a single unforgettable night, he realized that the promotion he had expected no longer mattered nearly as much as the lesson he had just learned before the entire company. The applause gradually softened until the ballroom settled into complete silence once again. Maya Brooks looked across the audience with the same calm expression she had carried from the moment she entered the hotel. She did not begin with financial achievements, market forecasts, or ambitious growth plans. Instead, she rested both hands lightly on the podium and smiled with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she said gently. "Not for standing tonight, but for the work that made this company worth standing for." Her voice carried effortlessly through the ballroom, warm enough to feel personal even in a room filled with hundreds of people. Every balance sheet tells us how a business performs. Every interaction tells us who we are. No one reached for a phone. No one whispered. The audience listened with complete attention. Maya continued, "Over the past several months, I have visited our offices, factories, warehouses, and customer service centers without introducing myself. I wanted to meet people before they knew my title. I wanted to understand the culture we were building together." Several employees exchanged surprised glances as they realized they had unknowingly spoken with her during those visits. Maya smiled as familiar faces appeared throughout the room. "I met extraordinary people who stayed late to help coworkers, managers who protected their teams during difficult seasons, and employees who treated complete strangers with remarkable kindness. They reminded me why this company deserves to succeed." She paused briefly before her expression became more thoughtful. "I also witnessed moments that challenged me. Moments when assumptions were made before conversations began. Moments when appearance carried more weight than character." The room became perfectly still again. Ethan lowered his eyes toward the table. Olivia remained standing beside the empty chair, unable to bring herself to sit down. Maya never looked directly at either of them. She spoke to the entire company instead. Leadership is not measured by the seat you occupy. It is measured by how you treat the person you believe cannot change your future. The words settled across the ballroom with quiet strength. They were not spoken with anger or accusation. They sounded more like an invitation to become better. Maya continued, "Earlier this evening I experienced something that could have become an argument. Instead, it became a lesson. Not because anyone intended it that way, but because every ordinary moment gives us an opportunity to choose respect." She looked toward the employees serving dinner along the edges of the ballroom. The people greeting guests at the entrance, preparing meals in the kitchen, cleaning conference rooms after meetings, answering customer calls, or delivering packages deserve exactly the same dignity as every executive seated here tonight. Titles may organize responsibility, but they never determine human worth. Several board members quietly nodded in agreement. One after another, employees throughout the ballroom began applauding once more, this time more softly, with genuine emotion instead of celebration. Maya raised one hand slightly, allowing the applause to fade before speaking again. "Tomorrow morning our human resources team will begin a company-wide review focused on leadership culture, professional conduct, and mutual respect. This is not about punishment. It is about making certain our values are reflected in every conversation, every decision, and every opportunity we create together." Ethan slowly stood from his chair. The confidence that had defined him all evening had disappeared. When Maya finished speaking, he took several careful steps toward the stage. The entire ballroom watched in complete silence as he stopped a respectful distance away. "Ms. Brooks," he said quietly, his voice carrying unmistakable sincerity, "I judged you before I knew you, and I failed to show the respect every person deserves. I am deeply sorry." Maya looked at him for a long moment before offering a gentle nod. "Thank you for saying those words," she replied. "The most important decision you make tonight is not admitting you were wrong. It is deciding who you will become tomorrow." No applause followed immediately. There was only quiet reflection, and somehow that silence carried more hope than any standing ovation ever could. The gala ended without fanfare. One by one, conversations gave way to quiet handshakes, thoughtful smiles, and long moments of reflection as guests slowly made their way toward the grand ballroom doors. Outside, the city shimmered beneath a clear night sky, its glass towers reflecting thousands of lights that stretched across the streets like rivers of gold. Maya Brooks stepped into the cool evening air without an escort, pausing for a brief moment beneath the entrance canopy as a gentle breeze carried away the last echoes of the orchestra. She had attended countless corporate events throughout her career, but she understood that real change never happened inside speeches. It happened afterward, in ordinary choices made by ordinary people. Behind her, employees left the hotel in smaller groups than they had arrived. Some spoke quietly about the company's future. Others reflected on their own assumptions with surprising honesty. A young administrative assistant held the door open for a maintenance worker she had never met before, offering a warm smile instead of hurrying past. A regional manager thanked the catering staff personally before leaving the ballroom. Small moments. Simple gestures. Yet Maya noticed them all. They reminded her that culture was never transformed by policies alone. It changed one respectful interaction at a time. Inside the nearly empty ballroom, the executive table remained exactly as it had been during the evening. Crystal glasses still reflected the fading chandelier light, folded linen napkins rested neatly beside polished silverware, and one elegant chair remained untouched. The place card bearing Maya's name still stood where it had been placed before the first guest arrived. No one moved it. No one sat in it. It had quietly become something more than a reserved seat. It had become a silent reminder that dignity cannot be assigned by appearance, wealth, or title. Ethan Carter lingered alone for several minutes after everyone else had departed. He looked toward the empty chair before slowly walking beside it. His reflection appeared faintly in the polished tabletop as he carefully picked up Maya's place card and held it for a long moment. Earlier that evening he had believed leadership meant authority, influence, and recognition. Now he understood that leadership began much earlier, in the invisible decisions people made before anyone important entered the room. He gently placed the card back exactly where he had found it, not because anyone was watching, but because respect deserved to exist even in an empty ballroom. Across the hotel lobby, Olivia quietly thanked the receptionist before leaving, something she had not thought to do when she arrived. The words felt unfamiliar at first, but they were sincere. Outside, she caught one final glimpse of Maya speaking with the elderly server she had greeted hours earlier. They laughed softly together for only a few seconds before shaking hands. There were no cameras surrounding them now, no applause, and no audience left to impress. It was simply one person treating another with kindness. Maya eventually walked toward the waiting car that would take her home, but before stepping inside she turned once to admire the illuminated skyline. The company she led would continue growing. Markets would rise and fall. Executives would come and go. Quarterly reports would eventually be forgotten. Yet she hoped one lesson from this evening would remain. Every stranger carries a story invisible to the eye. Every person deserves respect before they earn admiration. Every act of kindness has the power to change far more than a single conversation. As the car quietly disappeared into the city, the lights of the hotel continued glowing against the night, and somewhere inside the now silent ballroom, one empty chair remained beneath the chandelier, waiting not for someone important, but for a world willing to recognize that every human being already is.